Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carter Walker. I love talking about movies, music, comics, and games. And last night I went and saw Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which is the sequel to the 2018 Aquaman. And this one focuses with Black Manta as the main villain and pits Orm on the same side as Arthur. And so honestly, I am a really big fan of the first Aquaman. I think it's a ton of fun. It's just a great movie to turn on and just enjoy. There's not a lot maybe going on underneath the surface, underneath the hood, but I still really have a lot of fun with it. I think it's one of the better DCEU movies, and I was actually looking forward to Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. However, this movie has had a bunch of well documented production issues since pretty much the day it started. They finished principal photography, and it's been done for what, like 2 years now? I could be wrong on that. Done for so long, and they've been filming and reshooting and re editing with test screenings, and there's reports of like disastrous test screenings, and they had Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton being there. And I mean, spoiler alert, they're not in the final film just because it is the end of the DCEU. And so, unfortunately, they are totally gone from this film. There is no mention of the wider DCEU here, no cameos to expect. So, I figured I'd just get that right out of the way in case you were really looking forward to that. So, I'm going to get right into the positives here. The biggest positive I have for this movie is once again the villains in this movie are a ton of fun, just like the first one. I very much enjoyed Black Manta and Orm, again, just like how I did in the first one. They were the best part, far and away, of that movie. And so, anytime that Black Manta or Orm are on screen, the movie just gets a little bit better. Black Manta, particularly, is great here. He's just like so evil in this movie, so you don't really know what he's gonna do next. Orm gets a pretty good arc here where he's like trying to redeem himself for everything that happened in the first film. He doesn't show up until the second act of the movie, but when he does show up, the movie gets marginally better, and his chemistry with Arthur is really, really well done. And Patrick Wilson just plays Orm. He's such a great actor. Patrick Wilson is just an actor that when he shows up in something, he's going to give it his all. He doesn't really phone in anything that what I've seen. I could totally be wrong, but I really enjoy Patrick Wilson. I think he's very underrated. And so honestly, those two characters really bolstered the movie for me. And the practical set design, there was quite a few practical sets in this movie, especially when they're on land, that looked really great, and I was very much appreciative of the practical set use in this film. I did enjoy how, when they could, James Wan would use practical sets and really try and be as practical as possible. And you can tell that although he does love his CGI, he is a filmmaker that grew up very guerrilla. If you've seen his first few movies, he is very, very used to just the very guerrilla and dirty techniques of filmmaking, especially if you've seen Saw. So he's someone who's very familiar with practical set use. And my last positive, yes, my last positive, were the designs of the villains. Black Manta looks phenomenal here. I am a little bummed that Orm doesn't get his Ocean Master helmet. His suit was okay. Aquaman's suit is like top 5 superhero suits. It looks so good. Incredible. His stealth suit is kind of dumb, but that's just me. His regular suit, though, is phenomenal. And to use a Mortal Kombat term, the jobbers, the faceless army that gets summoned in the third act inevitably to fight, they look very, very cool. Their design is pretty great. I thought it was very like Lord of the Rings-esque, and so I really appreciated that. Real quick, I'm editing this in post. I forgot to say a positive, so here it is. Action here was very, very well done. My favorite fight scene was either Black Manta versus Aquaman. Anytime they square up, it's fantastic, particularly one in a cave in the end of the second act. I thought that one was phenomenal. And there's one shot here of Black Manta in the dark that I thought was just peak. However, this is a movie that really fell flat for me and ended up disappointing me. So I'm going to get right into the mixed. Jason Momoa as Aquaman just fully leans into like the cheese and the bro here. Like everyone has that like frat boy bro that they know, and Jason Momoa as Aquaman is just that guy in this movie. He's full of like I'm not going to do it. He just doesn't seem to take anything seriously. And if he does, he takes it seriously for 30 seconds and then reverts back into his bro persona. This is honestly my least favorite performance of him as Aquaman, if you're counting Aquaman 1 and Zack Snyder's Justice League. This one is probably my least favorite performance by him. It feels the least genuine. It feels the most phoned in. So unfortunately, that was quite of a bummer. The rest of the cast outside the two villains really aren't doing all that great of a job. The performances here weren't very good. I do enjoy Jason Momoa as Aquaman in every movie but this one, and so that was kind of a bummer just seeing that. And the CGI was pretty terrible at a lot of points, but then you get some things like his suit in motion that looks great. You get some things like some slow-mo shots that look fantastic. And so yeah, unfortunately the CGI was very spotty at times. The performances felt phoned in. And I'm putting those in mixed because sometimes the CGI is great. There's a few sequences where I was like, that looks really, really well done. And sometimes there's a few performances like Patrick Wilson and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II that look fantastic, but for the most part, it kind of just fell flat. And going into my negatives here, this movie is a mess. It's very much cobbled together through reshoots and in the editing room. It very much just feels like it is a amalgamation of many different cuts because it is. It's again notoriously known that WB just absolutely throttled this movie in the editing room, in the post-production, and just forced many, many reshoots, cuts, different changes to fit with the Keaton timeline, to fit with the Affleck timeline. Because when you had Walter Hamada at the front, we're like, we're rebooting everything. Keaton is the new Batman. And then you had Dwayne Johnson pull up with Henry Cavill, and they're like, you know what, dude, we're pulling up. We're getting Crisis on Infinite Earths back. We're reshooting everything with Affleck's Batman. And then we are going to make a post-credit scene for Crisis for The Flash. And then that's going to tie into Aquaman 2. You can just feel and see when you watch the movie that there's so much exposition just given over sequences that were supposed to be a set piece. For example, Orm's breakout, there's a whole like 20 minutes probably missing from that. That's an exaggeration. There's a whole 10 minutes missing from that scene that's just explained through Dolph Lundgren giving exposition. And that happens quite a few times throughout the movie. You can tell this movie was just dealt a bad hand. You had the Amber Heard controversy, and so WB probably cut out a lot of her scenes. And then the controversy again, where maybe she's innocent, maybe she's not. I'm not going to comment on that. Where they maybe added some scenes back in. She comes in to save the day. And it just feels like this is a movie that played it way too safe, is just a committee made movie. And unfortunately, that just means that I really dislike it. Do I think it's a little bit more memorable than Shazam 2? Yeah, sure. I watched Shazam 2 in March, and I have a pretty good memory when it comes to movies. I honestly cannot recall anything about that film. So for right now, I'd say Aquaman 2 and Shazam 2 are pretty much in the same boat as far as quality. But at the end of the day, the DCEU again just goes out with a whimper. And I really don't want to blame anybody but WB. It's the studio executives that just absolutely screwed this movie. Didn't even bring it to dinner first. They just screwed it right in front of its family. And it just makes me sad to see the DCEU go out like this. I would love to see James Wan's original cut of the film. I would even love to see like a documentary or a book or like a making of this movie, which just goes into so much detail because I'm sure there's so much that we don't know about. They have been screening this movie for years. Viewer Anon on Twitter said last night that he's seen 3 different cuts of this movie in the last like year or so. And that's absurd. Like I understand that they were dealt a bad hand with DC movies just flopping. I mean, it's kind of on them if they flop because not a lot of them have been very good. But they just course correct so poorly. And so at the end of the day, it really bums me out to give this movie a bad score. But at the same time, it's also kind of vindicating considering that this is a movie that's just been made by a studio that just got absolutely screwed again in front of its family, taken apart, reassembled into some monster. I'm sure James Wan is just so sad. I'm sure everyone involved that put their creative process into this movie is just so upset with how it turned out. I'm sure there's some people that will like this movie, and if you do, that's awesome. For me, I'm more personally upset about the filmmaking process and the creative process just being disrupted. And that, at the end of the day, is really a big travesty and part of the reason why I disliked this movie so much. Whereas in Shazam 2, it was just a bad movie. I didn't enjoy that movie, honestly, the more I think about it. This movie, I'm sure at some point, it was very decent, it was very interesting. However, they honestly just kind of dropped the ball. They fumbled the bag, so to speak. I guess for the negatives, that was like a rant on DC and WB. For the actual negatives, plot is just incoherent. So much is cobbled together in the editing room. The editing is awful. Pacing is awful. I found the tone to be pretty bad. There's just riddled with plot holes. It's like a piece of Swiss cheese. There's different things where there's this whole island that's making a ton of pollution, and they're like, the surface, they can't see it because it's thermo masked. And then you go to the island, and it's like the size of freaking like the Cayman Islands, probably even bigger, and it's this massive volcano just leaking green toxic air. Like no one saw that for 5 months. Give me a break. Stuff like that is just commonplace in this movie, and again, it played it way too safe, didn't take any risks. At the end of the day, it feels like this movie could have just been skipped. Nothing would have changed in Arthur's life or anything. Nothing really happens. And at the end of the day, that's just a bummer because I really, again, enjoyed the first Aquaman. It feels like all of the creative flavor has just been sucked out. And at the end of the day, I really just didn't enjoy it. This was a movie where it was kind of cringy. It was kind of funny at some parts. But overall, made me just disappointed. and left me with a bad sour taste in my mouth. This is a movie where the documentation and filmmaking is actually way more interesting than the film itself. So unfortunately, overall, I'm gonna give Aquaman 2 like a 3 out of 10. One of my least favorites of the year, honestly. I'm a lot harsher on this because it is a movie that is a sequel to something I like. I'm sure if I watch this somewhere down the line, I might like it a little bit more. But yeah, guys, that's in my honest like bottom 5, 10 movies of the year. Nestled comfortably right next to some pretty bad horror movies and a few controversial picks. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm Carter. I hope you enjoy and have a great rest of your day.